Flashing red and blue lights painted my garage door in violent, pulsing streaks. I stood at the edge of my driveway, barefoot, arms crossed, watching as two patrol cars idled in front of my house like I was some kind of criminal. My car, my black sedan, sat exactly where I had left it, slightly angled outside the boundary of my driveway, its front tire just touching the curb. And standing beside it, clipboard in hand, lips tight with authority she clearly thought she owned, was Karen Whitmore. "Officer," she said sharply, pointing at my car like it was evidence in a murder case, "that vehicle has been in violation for over 12 hours. We've issued 2 warnings. This is now a formal complaint." One of the officers nodded, stepping toward me. "Sir, we're going to need you to move the vehicle immediately, or we'll have to escalate this." Behind Karen, 2 neighbors stood on their lawns pretending not to stare. One of them, Mr. Sat Jenkins, was very clearly recording on his phone, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't about a car. This was about control. I exhaled slowly, forcing my shoulders to relax, even as the situation tightened around me. "Escalate?" I repeated, my voice calm, almost too calm. Karen didn't like that. I could see it in the way her jaw clenched. "Yes," she snapped. "Non-compliance with HOA regulations can lead to towing, fines, and further legal action. You were informed when you moved here." The officer stepped closer again, softer this time. "Sir, we don't want to make this more complicated than it needs to be." I looked from him, to the car, to Karen, and then I smiled. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Neither do I." But none of them had any idea just how complicated this was about to become. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 42 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside Austin, Texas. At least, it used to be quiet. I'm the kind of person who keeps to himself. I don't blast music, I don't throw parties, and I definitely don't go looking for trouble. But I also don't run from it. Professionally, I'm a senior police officer. 15 years on the force. Most of that spent dealing with situations a whole lot messier than parking disputes and overreaching homeowners associations. But standing there that evening, you wouldn't have known that. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Before I go any further, I need to ask you something. Have you ever had someone try to control something that was clearly yours? Your property, your choices, your space? If you have, I want you to drop your experience in the comments. I read them, and trust me, some of those stories are just as wild as what I'm about to tell you. And if you're the kind of person who likes real stories like this, ones that might actually help you handle situations like this in real life, go ahead and subscribe. Because this is just the beginning. Now let me take you back a few hours before those lights showed up. It started earlier that afternoon. I had just gotten home from a long shift. One of those days that drains you without warning. Paperwork, internal reviews, a tense meeting that dragged longer than it should have. All I wanted was to park, go inside, and forget the world existed for a few hours. My driveway was partially blocked by a delivery van parked across the street, making the angle tighter than usual. So I did what any normal person would do. I parked slightly off-center. Not on anyone else's property, not blocking traffic, just not perfectly aligned within the invisible boundaries the HOA loved to obsess over. I turned off the engine, grabbed my bag, and went inside. That should have been the end of it. But about an hour later, there was a knock. Sharp, precise, not friendly. I opened the door to find Karen Whitmore standing there, dressed like she was about to attend a board meeting instead of knocking on someone's front door over a parking job. "Mr. Carter," she said, without a hint of warmth, "your vehicle is improperly parked." I blinked at her. "Good afternoon to you too." She didn't smile. "It violates Section 4.3 of the HOA parking guidelines." I leaned against the doorframe, studying her for a second. "You mean the guideline that says not to obstruct public access or neighboring driveways?" "Yes," she replied quickly. "Then we're good," I said, "because I'm not doing either." Her lips pressed into a thinner line. "It also states that vehicles must be fully contained within designated parking areas." I almost laughed. "Karen," I said, keeping my tone even, "it's my driveway." "Partially outside your driveway," she corrected. There it was. That need to win. That need to assert authority over something trivial. "I'll adjust it later," I said. "Right now I'm heading inside." "That won't be acceptable." I paused. Something in her tone shifted. Less about rules, more about power. I straightened slightly. Excuse me? If it's not corrected within the hour, she continued, I'll have to issue a formal warning. I stared at her for a moment, weighing my options. In my line of work, you learn quickly when something is worth pushing back on. And when it's not. At that moment, it wasn't. Do what you need to do, I said, and closed the door. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. An hour later, I found a notice taped to my door. Bright yellow, bold lettering, violation notice. I read it once, then again. And then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous. Still, I grabbed my keys, stepped outside, and adjusted the car. Just enough to bring it fully inside the driveway. Problem solved. Or so I thought. But sometime later, maybe 2 hours, maybe less, I stepped outside again to take a call. And that's when I saw it. Another notice. This one wasn't taped. It was tucked under my windshield wiper. Final warning. That's when something clicked, because now it wasn't about the car anymore. Now it was about escalation. I looked around, scanning the street, and there she was, standing across the road talking to someone else, but watching me. Waiting. That's when I made a decision. I didn't move the car again, I didn't remove the notice, I didn't engage, I simply went back inside. Because sometimes the best way to understand how far someone is willing to go is to let them keep going. And Karen Whitmore, she went all the way. Which is how we ended up with 2 patrol cars outside my house, officers being asked to enforce HOA rules, and a situation that was about to flip in a way none of them saw coming. Standing there in the flashing lights, I could feel every eye on me. The officers, Karen, the neighbors pretending not to stare. And I knew exactly what they saw. Just a homeowner. Just a guy who parked his car wrong. Just someone about to be put in his place. I slipped my hands into my pockets, letting the silence stretch just a little longer. All right, I said finally, looking at the officer in front of me. Let's talk about this properly. Karen shifted, clearly expecting immediate compliance. Instead, she was about to get something very different. The officer hesitated for half a second, like he wasn't quite sure what I meant by that. Karen, on the other hand, had no such hesitation. There's nothing to discuss, she cut in, her voice sharp enough to slice through the tension. The violation is clear. The enforcement is straightforward. I turned my head slowly and looked at her. Not annoyed, not angry, just observing. That seemed to bother her more than anything. Is it? I asked. She straightened, gripping her clipboard tighter. Yes, it is. The younger of the 2 officers shifted his weight, glancing between us. Ma'am, he said carefully, this is a civil matter. We're really just here to keep things from escalating. Karen's eyes snapped to him. It already has escalated. He has ignored multiple notices. I let out a quiet breath, then nodded toward my car. And yet, I said, it's fully within my driveway now. That made the older officer frown slightly. He took a few steps toward the car, crouched a bit, and looked at the alignment with the driveway line. There was a pause, a long one. Well, he said slowly, it does look compliant at the moment. Karen's composure cracked, just a little. That's not the point, she said quickly. He was in violation. There are procedures. There are consequences. I tilted my head. So you called the police over something that has already been corrected? Her jaw tightened again. It's about repeated non-compliance, she insisted. I nodded, like I was genuinely considering her argument. Repeated, I echoed. You mean the one time, earlier today? Behind her, Mr. Jenkins let out a low whistle before quickly pretending to cough. Karen shot him a glare, then turned back to me. You're being deliberately difficult. I almost smiled. No, I said calmly. I'm being precise. The older officer stood up and walked back toward us, his expression more neutral now. But there was a shift in his posture. Less authority. More evaluation. Sir, he said, from what we're seeing right now, there's no active violation. Karen took a step forward, her voice rising slightly. But there was, and he refused to comply when instructed. I looked at the officer again. Did I refuse? I asked. Or did I say I'd handle it later and then handle it? The officer hesitated. That hesitation was everything, because now, doubt had entered the situation. Karen could feel it too, and she didn't like it. He's twisting this, she said, her tone sharpening. This is exactly the kind of behavior that disrupts community standards. Community standards, I repeated, letting the words sit for a moment. Then I glanced around. Across the street, Mrs. Alvarez had stepped out onto her porch. A couple further down the road had paused mid-walk, their dog sitting obediently beside them as they watched. Even the delivery driver from earlier had slowed his van just enough to take in the scene. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was a show, and Karen had made sure of that. I shifted my stance slightly, grounding myself. "Officer," I said, turning back to the older one, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. If someone reports a violation, but by the time you arrive there's no violation, what exactly are you enforcing?" He exhaled through his nose, clearly thinking. "Well, generally, we don't enforce HOA regulations directly," he said. "That's typically handled through civil channels." I nodded. "So your presence here is just to ensure things stay calm," he finished. "Exactly." Karen stepped in again, frustration bleeding into her voice now. "This is not just about staying calm. This is about accountability. If residents can ignore warnings without consequence—" "I didn't ignore," I said, cutting in for the first time. "Not loud, not aggressive, but firm." That got her attention. "I addressed it," I continued. "I adjusted the vehicle. The issue was resolved. You did so after being formally warned. And that still constitutes a violation." I took a step closer, not into her space, but close enough that she couldn't ignore me. "Karen," I said quietly, "you're trying to turn a resolved situation into a punishable one." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Because she knew. She knew that was exactly what she was doing. The younger officer cleared his throat, trying to diffuse things. "Look, maybe we can all just—" But Karen wasn't done. "No," she said, her voice tight. "This is exactly the problem. People think they can bend the rules, make excuses, and face no consequences." I studied her for a moment, and then something clicked into place. This wasn't about me. Not really. This was about her needing to prove something to someone. Maybe the HOA board, maybe the neighborhood, maybe herself. I'd seen it before. Different context, same psychology. People who feel powerless in one area, overcompensating in another. I straightened slightly. "All right," I said, calm but decisive. "Let's say you're right." That caught her off guard. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I am right." "Let's say you are," I repeated. "What exactly do you want to happen right now?" There was a pause. A real one. Because for the first time, she had to define the endgame. "I want acknowledgement of the violation," she said finally. "And I want it documented." I nodded slowly. And then the HOA will proceed with appropriate action. Which is fines. Possible escalation if behavior continues. I let that sit for a moment. Then I looked at the officers again. "Are you hearing this?" The older one gave a small nod. "She's asking you to enforce a documentation process for a resolved civil issue," I said. Karen snapped. "I'm asking for accountability." "And you're using them to get it," I replied. That landed. The younger officer shifted again, clearly uncomfortable now. "Ma'am," he said, "we really can't get involved in HOA documentation. That's not—" "So you're just going to ignore this?" she interrupted. "No, we're not ignoring it," the older officer said calmly. "We're just not the right channel for that." Karen's face flushed slightly. I could see it, the moment where controls start slipping. And when that happens, people either step back or they push harder. She pushed. "Fine," she said, her voice tightening. "Then I'll call for towing." That changed the air immediately. The younger officer looked at her sharply. "Ma'am, you said it yourself," she continued, pressing on. "You're here to keep things from escalating. If he refuses to cooperate, I have every right to proceed." I raised an eyebrow. "Towing?" I repeated. "From my own driveway? It's partially outside." "It's not," the older officer said firmly this time. That stopped her. He gestured toward the car. "We've already established that." Karen's grip on the clipboard tightened so much her knuckles went pale. For a second I thought she might actually back down. But then she did something else. She turned and looked at the neighbors, at the audience, and then back at the officers. "Then I want this documented," she said again, doubling down. "I want it on record that he was in violation and refused initial compliance." There it was again. Control. Narrative. She didn't just want to win. She wanted it written down that she had won. I took a slow breath, then reached into my pocket. Both officers' attention shifted instantly. Not alarmed, but alert. I pulled out my wallet, flipped it open, and held it loosely at my side. "I think," I said calmly, "before anything gets documented, we should all be very clear on the situation." The older officer's eyes flicked to the badge inside my wallet. then back to my face, and in that moment, everything changed, not dramatically, not loudly, but subtly. His posture straightened just a fraction. His expression shifted, just enough, recognition, or at least suspicion. Karen didn't notice it. Not yet, she was too focused on pushing forward. "Clear?" she said, almost scoffing. "It's already clear." I looked at her. Then back at the officers. "Is it?" I asked quietly. The younger officer stepped slightly closer, trying to get a better look without being obvious. "Sir," he said cautiously, "what exactly are you suggesting?" I met his gaze, and for the first time since this started, I let a hint of something show. Not arrogance, not intimidation, just certainty. "I'm suggesting," I said, "that this situation isn't what it looks like." Karen exhaled sharply. "Oh, please." But the older officer raised a hand slightly, cutting her off. His eyes were still on me now, focused, measuring. "Go on," he said, and just like that, the balance of power started to shift, not fully, not yet, but enough that everyone standing there, Karen, the neighbors, even the air itself, could feel it. Something was changing, and they were about to find out exactly what. The older officer's eyes stayed locked on mine, steady, calculating. "Go on," he said again, quieter this time. For a brief moment, everything around us seemed to slow, the flashing lights, the distant hum of a passing car, even the murmurs from the neighbors across the street. Karen, however, was anything but patient. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Whatever he's trying to imply." I lifted a hand slightly. Not at her, at the officers. A small, controlled motion. "Before anything gets written down," I said, my voice even, "before any report, any documentation, any escalation, I think it's important you know exactly who you're dealing with." The younger officer's brow furrowed. The older one didn't move, but his attention sharpened. I turned the wallet slightly so the badge inside caught the glow of the patrol car lights. Not flashing it, not shoving it in their faces, just revealing it. The older officer took one step closer, then another. His eyes dropped to the badge, then back up to me. And in that instant, recognition clicked into place. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was unmistakable. His posture shifted immediately, subtle but real. The kind of shift you only notice if you've spent years reading people under pressure. "Sir," he said, his tone changing just enough to carry weight now. "You mind if I take a closer look?" I nodded once and handed him the wallet. Karen frowned, clearly irritated by the sudden change in focus. "What is this?" she demanded. "Why are we?" No one answered her. The younger officer stepped in beside his partner, glancing down at the badge and ID. His eyes widened, just slightly, but enough. He leaned in, whispering something under his breath. The older officer gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then he handed the wallet back to me. "Understood, sir," he said quietly. "Sir." That word landed like a stone in still water. Karen heard it, and this time she noticed. Her expression shifted, confusion first, then irritation, then something closer to unease. "Wait," she said, looking between us. "What does that mean? What's going on?" I slipped the wallet back into my pocket, taking my time. Not to be dramatic, just controlled. "I told you," I said calmly, meeting her eyes, "this situation isn't what it looks like." The younger officer straightened, suddenly very aware of his surroundings. The older one cleared his throat lightly. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Karen now, "I think we need to reassess how we're approaching this." Karen blinked, thrown off balance. "Reassess? On what grounds?" He gestured toward me, not overtly but enough. "On the grounds that there's no active violation," he said, "and no legal basis for enforcement at this time." Her jaw tightened again, but this time there was something underneath it. Doubt. "You just said," she started. "I said," he interrupted, still calm but firmer now, "that earlier there may have been a minor issue. It has since been corrected." She shook her head, her grip on the clipboard tightening again. No, that's not how this works. You don't just ignore." "No one is ignoring anything," he said, "but this is not a police matter." The emphasis on that last sentence was deliberate, clear, final. Karen looked at me again, really looked this time, as if trying to piece together what she'd missed. "What exactly did you show them?" she asked slowly. I held her gaze. "Nothing you needed to worry about," I said. That answer didn't satisfy her, not even close. Her eyes narrowed. "I think it is something I need to worry about," she said, "because a second ago they were prepared to act and now suddenly they're stepping back." I tilted my head slightly. "Or maybe," I said, "they're just following the law." That hit a nerve. I am following the law, she shot back. Are you? I asked quietly. That silence again. Heavy, uncomfortable. Behind her, the neighbors had stopped pretending. Mrs. Alvarez had moved closer to the edge of her lawn. The couple with the dog were now openly watching. Even Mr. Jenkins had lowered his phone just enough to actually see what was happening instead of recording blindly. The energy had shifted. Before, it was a spectacle of enforcement. Now, it was something else, something uncertain. Karen felt it, and she didn't like it. She turned back to the officers, trying to regain control. I want this documented, she said again, but her voice had lost a fraction of its earlier certainty. Regardless of whatever this is, there was a violation. The older officer exhaled slowly. Ma'am, he said, you're within your rights to file a report with your HOA board, but we are not going to document this as a police matter. Her eyes widened slightly. So that's it, she said. You just walk away? The younger officer spoke this time. Yes, ma'am, he said. Unless there's a criminal issue, there's nothing for us to enforce here. Karen let out a short, disbelieving laugh. This is unbelievable. I watched her carefully, because now we were at a turning point. She could walk away, regroup, handle it through proper channels, or she could make a mistake. You know what? She said suddenly, her voice sharpening again. Fine, if you won't do anything, I will. The older officer's expression tightened slightly. Ma'am, I'll escalate this myself, she continued, stepping forward. I'll contact the towing company directly. I'll file for immediate action through the HOA board, and I'll make sure this is handled the way it should be. There it was, the push, the refusal to step back. I took a slow breath. Karen, I said, my tone still calm but firmer now, you might want to think that through. She turned to me sharply. Don't tell me what to think, she snapped. You've been difficult from the start, and now you're hiding behind whatever badge you just flashed. I'm not hiding, I said, and for the first time there was steel in my voice. Not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakable. The kind of tone that doesn't need volume to carry weight. She froze for half a second. Just half. That bit was enough. I'm giving you a chance to step back, I continued, because once you take that next step, it doesn't just affect me. Her eyes flickered. What is that supposed to mean? I held her gaze. It means, I said, you're about to involve yourself in something bigger than a parking complaint. The younger officer shifted again, clearly aware of where this was heading. Sir, he said cautiously. But I didn't look away from Karen, because this wasn't about them anymore. Not really. This was about her decision. Her line. You think I'm scared of that? She said, trying to regain her footing. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I glanced briefly at the officers, then back at her. No, I said finally, I think you don't realize it yet. That landed harder than anything else I'd said, because it wasn't a threat. It was a statement, and deep down, she knew it. The street had gone completely quiet now. No whispers, no movement, just the faint crackle of the patrol car radio in the background. Karen's confidence wavered, just for a second. But then she did what people like her always do when they feel control slipping. She doubled down. Go ahead, she said, lifting her chin slightly. Explain it to me. What exactly is so bigger about this? I studied her for a moment, then I took a small step forward. Not aggressive, not confrontational, just enough to close the distance between us. And when I spoke again, my voice was quieter, but heavier. I'm a senior officer, I said. No dramatic pause, no build-up, just the truth. Simple. Direct and final. For a second, nothing happened. Then the realization hit her. You could see it. The way her expression shifted, the way her posture stiffened, the way her grip on that clipboard loosened just slightly. What? She said. The younger officer looked away, trying not to make it worse. The older one remained still, neutral, but he didn't contradict me. Because he couldn't. Karen looked between all of us now. Me, the officers, the neighbors, trying to find something, anything, that would restore the balance she'd just lost. But it was gone, completely. You're a police officer? She said, her voice no longer sharp, just uncertain. I nodded once. 15 years. Silence. Heavy. Final. And just like that, everything flipped. The authority she thought she had, the control she tried to assert, the narrative she was building, all of it collapsed in an instant. Behind her, I heard a faint murmur ripple through the neighbors. Mr. Jenkins didn't even bother hiding his reaction this time. Wow, he muttered. Karen swallowed. You didn't say anything, she said almost defensively. I held her gaze. You didn't ask. That hit harder than anything else, because it exposed the truth. This was never about understanding. It was about control. And now? She didn't have it anymore. The older officer cleared his throat softly. Ma'am, he said, more measured now, I strongly suggest we bring this to a close. Karen didn't respond immediately. She just stood there, processing, recalculating, trying to figure out how to recover from a situation that had completely slipped out of her hands. And the truth was, there wasn't a clean way out anymore, because now, everyone was watching, and what happened next would define everything. Karen didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, staring at me like the ground beneath her feet had shifted, and she hadn't quite found her balance again. The clipboard that had once looked like a symbol of authority in her hands now seemed out of place, almost unnecessary. You didn't disclose that, she said finally, her voice quieter now, but still holding on to the last threads of control she had left. I didn't move. I wasn't required to, I replied. That answer landed exactly how it needed to, not aggressive, not defensive, just factual. The older officer shifted slightly, glancing between both of us before stepping in. Ma'am, he said calmly, at this point there's no violation, no enforcement action, and no reason for us to remain here. Karen blinked, like she was trying to process too many things at once. But, she started, there's nothing further to document on our end, he continued, cutting in gently but firmly. That was it. That was the line. And everyone there felt it. Karen's shoulders dropped just slightly, not enough for most people to notice, but I did, because I'd seen it before. That moment when someone realizes they've pushed too far, and there's no clean way to undo it. Behind her, the quiet murmurs from the neighbors started to build again. Low, curious, charged with that subtle shift in tone. Earlier, they were watching a man get put in his place. Now, they were watching someone lose control of a situation they thought they owned. Karen glanced back briefly, catching a few of those looks, and that's when it really hit her. This wasn't private anymore. It hadn't been for a while. And now, she was the one standing in the spotlight. I was only doing my job, she said, turning back to me, her voice softer but edged with defensiveness. I nodded once. I understand that, I said, and I meant it. That seemed to throw her off more than anything, because she was expecting resistance, pushback, maybe even retaliation, but not understanding. She hesitated, then straightened slightly again, trying to recover some composure. The rules are there for a reason. If people start ignoring them, they matter, I said, finishing the thought for her. She blinked. Yes. They do, I continued, but so does judgment. That hung in the air for a second. Not as a challenge, not as an accusation, just a truth. She looked at me, really looked this time, not as someone to correct, not as a problem to solve, but as someone she hadn't fully understood from the start, and maybe still didn't. The younger officer took a step back toward the patrol car, the tension clearly easing from his posture. Everything good here? He asked his partner quietly. The older officer gave a small nod. Yeah, we're done. He turned back to Karen one last time. If you have further concerns, he said, you'll need to handle them through your HOA's internal process. She nodded slowly. Not agreeing, not arguing, just accepting. That was new. The officers moved back toward their vehicles, the flashing lights still painting the street, but somehow feeling less intense now, less invasive. As the first patrol car door opened, the older officer paused and looked back at me. Have a good night, sir, he said. There was a subtle respect in his tone. Professional. Measured, I nodded. You too. The doors shut. Engines shifted. And one by one the patrol cars pulled away from the curb, their lights fading into the distance until the street returned to its usual quiet. No sirens, no urgency, just silence. For a moment, no one moved. Karen stood there, still holding that clipboard, but now it looked more like something she didn't know what to do with anymore. The neighbors lingered, pretending to mind their business but clearly still watching. And me? I stayed right where I was. Calm, grounded, exactly where I had been from the beginning. Karen exhaled slowly, then finally stepped back. I'll review this with the board, she said, her voice more measured now. I nodded. That's probably the best place for it. She hesitated, like she wanted to say something else, maybe justify, maybe explain, maybe even push one last time. But she didn't. Instead, she gave a small, tight nod, turned, and walked away. No dramatic exit, no final word, just a quiet retreat. Mr. Jenkins was the first to break the silence. "Didn't see that coming," he said under his breath, half to himself. I glanced over at him. "Most people don't," I replied. A couple of neighbors gave small nods, some with faint smiles, others just thoughtful. And just like that, the moment began to dissolve. Doors closed, lights dimmed, people returned to their routines. The street went back to being just a street again. I stood there for another second, then turned toward my car, still exactly where I had left it, perfectly within the lines. I shook my head slightly, a quiet breath escaping me. All of that over this. But that's how it goes sometimes. It's never really about the surface issue. It's about how people handle it, how far they push, and whether they know when to stop. I headed inside, closing the door behind me, the faint echo of the evening still lingering in my mind. And the truth is, situations like this, they happen more often than people think. Maybe not with flashing lights and a crowd of neighbors, but in smaller ways. Every day, someone pushing boundaries, someone testing control, someone assuming they know who they're dealing with, without ever taking the time to actually find out. And sometimes, the only thing that shifts the entire situation is staying calm long enough for the truth to reveal itself. So let me ask you this. What would you have done if you were in my position? Would you have moved the car immediately and avoided all of this? Or would you have stood your ground and let things play out? Go ahead and share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. I read them, and you'd be surprised how much people can learn from each other's stories. And if you enjoy real, story-driven situations like this, ones that don't just entertain but actually give you something to think about, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because there's always another story. And sometimes, the next one hits even closer to home.